I'm Robert Hoogland, and I'm the father in the case that's just in the BC Court of Appeal with trying to protect my daughter from being transitioned medically with cross-sex hormones, and obviously at this point I've lost that part of the battle, but I'm here to tell my story on this. The story really starts with all this, transitioning kind of stuff, sort of in, I would say, grade 5. She was kind of associating more with the boys, getting into a bit of trouble. She was kind of recognizing herself as a bit of a tomboy, I think, even, and I did too. And that's quite normal. What I knew at the time, going into grade 6, is that she was starting to get in some trouble. She was isolating a fair bit in her room and was spending more and more time on different social media platforms with both her phone and on the home computer, and so I was getting concerned with some of this stuff. So I thought, well, a good thing to do is have the school counselor maybe step in and intervene, and that's what we did. And I even worked with the school counselor at one point, because we put together like a safety plan for my daughter. That summer we were going to be going to Disneyland, so that was part of something on her safety plan that she could think about. That was, like a happy thought. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I'm just thinking I'm giving my daughter the help that she needs. And like I was saying, when I look back now, based on affidavits, I realized I had pretty much handed my daughter over to the trans agenda. We get through grade 6, and kind of into grade 7. There's this bit of it, I can sense a change, something's going on. So now there's this talk that maybe she's lesbian or something like that. And again, I'm thinking, well, it is what it is. It's not, it's harmless. I thought it was, my thoughts at the time on this stuff. And then one day in grade 7, I come home and I see the garbage can in the bathroom full of hair. And then I go into the room and I see my daughter, and she's wearing a toque. And I discover that she's cut all her hair off. What I come to find out later in court affidavits is that she's been watching a couple of videos. One was Handsome and Majestic, and the other one was called Boy. And in Boy, the exact same thing that my daughter just did is shown in that promotional video for transitioning. And that video makes the parents look like they're the worst nightmare, because they just don't get the real person that child is. So that's when I started thinking, okay, now we're going down a whole different road here. We're heading towards the transitioning stuff to some degree. But again, I kind of embraced it in the sense that I thought this is harmless. If she wants to, play in this quote unquote role, I don't mind that. Mm-hmm. She'll probably snap out of it like people used to do with goth and other things that, people got caught up in. That was kind of the social popular thing to do. Near the end of grade 7, I get a copy of the school yearbook. My daughter finally shows me. And in this yearbook, her name is now a different name. It's been changed from her female name to a male name. And I was furious. I phoned up the school because I thought, this is a complete violation of my rights as a parent. You can't just be behind my back switching names. And I don't know, the school seemed somewhat unapologetic about it, but I talked to the principal and I was quite upset, left there unhappy. But again, it was like, all right, well, if that's what we want. I refused to use the new name because I thought this is, a thing, again, that's going on. But then through the summer of between grade 7 and grade 8, this got even more serious, where my ex-wife is now setting up meetings with the high school, and they are going to accommodate her in the high school under this new name, and in the school setting in terms of washrooms and in terms of classes that she would be taking. And I thought, again, this is something that she'll probably outgrow. She's just going through puberty, and I wasn't as concerned then as I probably should have been. And then my ex-wife comes to me and says that we've got a psychologist who's going to be seeing your daughter, Dr. Wong, and I know nothing about this guy. She just tells me he's the top expert in all this area of transitioning or gender or ideology or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I didn't even really understand what it was at the time. And so I thought, okay, this is good, because now she's going to get the help that she needs. that this guy's going to assess her, and obviously he's going to realize that, you know, what she's doing, she really needs to help for, you know, the isolating, the depression, the other social awkwardness things that these kids go through. And you know, I even went into one of the assessment appointments, and keep in mind, she's only 13 at the time. And I even said this to Dr. Wong, and I even explained, you know, the crush on the male teacher. And he just took notes, and it's in the assessment. I mean, I can show that that's the stuff that I said. I guess he just wanted my take on it. And that was my one appointment with Dr. Wong. I ended up with another one at the end, which I'll explain in a bit. But I walked out of there thinking, okay, well, he got my message. He knows. I mean, obviously, you know, this will get cleared up. But again, I find out in court affidavits later that Dr. Wong was actually chosen by the school, and he's the guy he's their #1 transitioning psychologist that all these kids get referred to continue them along this path and to continue to be coached and led along. But again, like, people have questioned, why did you let your daughter see Dr. Wong? Because I didn't know any of this stuff. You know, I'm just trusting at this time still. So now we're into grade 8. She ends up with a crush on the PE teacher, ends up actually getting kicked out of the class because it gets a little out of control. I had to meet with the principal on that matter. And then there comes a point, and this is now going into the second half of grade 8, where I come to learn that she's made a suicide attempt. So the very next day, me and my ex and her, we take a trip to Surrey Emergency. And we have her see a registered psych nurse. And what ends up happening is it's discovered that she was doing this because of the fact that she was rejected by this PE teacher. To this day in court, the other side will not allow us to have those files unsealed from a Surrey Memorial Hospital, but yet they constantly claim that suicide was an attempt because of her gender dysphoria. It is not, and if it was, why are they not unsealing those files and trying to keep them protected? Because as you'll come to learn later is that like, I have no access to my daughter's medical records anymore because of everything that's happened. So anyway, so the suicide attempt happens. I'm calling around. I even called the police to get their insight. I'm trying to figure out ways to deal with the depression. Anything I can, because I'm thinking, okay, we need to deal with the real issues here. Whatever, she's playing this game with the gender stuff, but you know, it's the real issues that need to be addressed. You know, that part is getting serious. The rest is just noise surrounding it, and so we actually hustle Dr. Wallace Wong to finish his assessment because of this suicide attempt. We thought, okay, let's get this assessment out so we can see what our next step is. So we meet with Dr. Wallace Wong. And my daughter comes along too. So he's going over his assessment, and at the end of the assessment, and my daughter's sitting there in the room, and he goes, well, your daughter is a prime candidate for cross-sex hormones. She meets all the criteria. And I'm just looking at him like, are you out of your mind? And he's explaining away like these crushes on teachers by saying, well, yeah, she's a boy, but she's a gay boy. Like, it's just the absolute lunacy that was coming out, and I'm just thinking, this is insane. You're actually with a straight face telling me this, like, against all common sense, like.
And this is the man the school referred.
This is that psychologist, yes, this Dr. Wong. So anyways, of course, my daughter is, you know, it's like a kid in a candy store. She just can't wait to get going on this, and that's all she wants to talk about. I ended up emailing this Dr. Wong that evening because I was furious, and I said, you know, that was very unprofessional to be saying this stuff in front of my daughter. And he actually emailed back and apologized and said it was unprofessional. Looking back, he did it deliberately. I mean, at the time, I didn't realize all this other stuff, the way that these players are involved in all this funneling of your kid through the school system and into Children's Hospital, which I'm going to get to now. So anyways, after the assessment with Dr. Wong, I'm still trying to work on this stuff to do with, you know, mental health issues like depression. So I set up an appointment with my family doctor. So me and my daughter go see the family doctor. And he just kind of does the usual on these depression issues. You just got to work through it, eat healthy, sleep properly, all these things. And because they don't like to prescribe those kinds of medications like antidepressants to children, so they're always looking for ways to just develop coping skills, right? But of course, my daughter's bringing up this referral now that we have from Dr. Wong for a cross-sex hormone at Children's Hospital. And my family doctor knows nothing about this stuff. He has one of his secretaries, find the referral form, we look at it, and both of us kind of agree, okay, well, it looks like this is going to be a very long process. They're going to do a thorough assessment by now a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. And this is going to clear everything up. We're finally, this is great because I've been looking for a psychiatrist, and now I can get a free one now at BC Children's Hospital who will do this awesome stuff, right? And so he does the referral because we needed two. Dr. Wong and another doctor had to be a double referral. So anyway, so the appointment ends up in the summer after grade 8, and at this point now she's 14, and I don't go because I'm working, but my ex-wife and my daughter go downtown to BC Children's Hospital, and they do the assessment. Partway through the assessment, about 2 hours in, my ex-wife gives me a call and says, "Rob, guess what's going on here?" I said, "What?" "Well, they're about to start injecting her with cross-sex hormones right now, testosterone." And I said, "Absolutely no way." And so they didn't do it. And then I get the consent form dropped off at my house later that evening. My ex-wife drops it off, and I'm reading through it, and the stuff on there, like, you wouldn't do that to an animal. It's listing all these risk factors, right? Like increased heart disease, different types of cancers. Sterilization was right there on the top of the list, which is the worst one of the bunch. Like just madness. But what these kids latch onto is the other parts, which is, your voice will be lower, you'll grow facial hair, right? They're not thinking about being sterilized and that they're not going to have a family later when they're 14. That's probably the last thing on their minds at that point in their life, right? For most kids that age. And then the form goes on to further say that all this stuff is experimental. We really do not know the outcomes and the other risk factors because it's so new. And it has a disclaimer in there that says you will not actually change from a girl to a boy or a boy to a girl. It's in the consent form because they recognize they cannot change DNA. So in the consent form, they even admit that, yeah, you're not really changing. We're just kind of giving you some features of the opposite sex. And that's really all it is, except that they're permanent features. It's not something where you can say, well, that was fun. I had a beard for a year. Now I want to go back to being a girl. Like my daughter will be shaving now for the rest of her life, whether she continues forward or desists, detransitions. So yeah, scary stuff. So obviously I said no. Well, then I had this social worker, Robin Lalani, who keeps harassing me, emailing, phoning. And I keep telling her that I'm not consenting, I'm not signing that consent form. And this goes on from August until December. In December, I finally get a registered letter in the mail from the hospital itself, signed by the doctor there, this Dr. Brendan Hirsch. And he says essentially that under the Power of the Infants Act, he's taking responsibility and control of my daughter's medical. And I'm out of the loop, and the fact that I'm not consenting is inconsequential at this point. It doesn't matter, and that I no longer have access to my daughter's medical records. I'm not going to know what's going on. It's completely out of my hands. My daughter is now running the show as apparently a mature consenting minor in this matter. And he said, you have 2 weeks to file in court, otherwise we're going to go ahead with the cross-sex hormones. So of course, I go into provincial court, and because I don't know where to get this thing started, but I figure, I've already got an existing file in provincial court in terms of my wife and us and the separation stuff. So that's the file I go under. I just go in, I file a notice of motion to stop, the cross-sex hormones. So about, I would say within a month I'm in court on this, under this notice of motion. And at that time, quite a bit has actually happened in between me going and filing that in court and actually appearing in court for the first time. I end up getting connected with somebody named Angelina Ireland through a girlfriend of mine at the time, who was connected to Jen Smith because they had been waiting for a document that said, hey, they're going to transition your child without any parental consent based on the Infants Act. And so I finally, I guess, had this document they'd all been talking about that probably exists, but no one had ever seen. And so both of them come over, and Jen Smith does an interview, which ends up in the Post-Millennial. At this point, there's some attention coming to it. The National Post, I guess, noticed the story in the Post-Millennial. Now they're contacting me, and they're interested in this case. And it hasn't even been in the courtroom yet, interestingly enough. So moving forward, because of this, I end up, getting in touch with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and they end up being able to give me a lawyer named Herb Dunton. So now I've also got a lawyer who's willing to work pro bono, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. And so he shows up with me in court, and I believe it was pretty near the middle of January was the first court date, and of course, we ended up getting a 2-week injunction because my ex figured she needed a lawyer too, so that was essentially, but no cross-sex hormones were to be allowed. The provincial court judge ruled that in those 2 weeks. In the meantime, my understanding is that lawyers like Barbara Finley all kind of found my ex-wife and all this and kind of latched onto her. So suddenly she was lawyered up too. And so 2 weeks later, we're back in court. The provincial court judge again gives us an injunction that is going to move this now into the Supreme Court, and we've got, I forget how many days we were given, it was about 3 weeks, and again the cross-sex hormones weren't going to happen. The provincial court judge says no, get this into the BC Supreme Court. But in that month, something very interesting happened, is that the National Post did run a front page story in between those 2 court dates, in the National Post, Vancouver Sun, you name it, all these papers, and the backlash against what these doctors and what the hospital was doing was incredible. Because normally, my understanding is that they're used to putting these kids on a pedestal, and the parent looks bad for not wanting to go along with their child's gender dysphoria. Well, to the complete shock, I think, of everybody on the other side, that was the opposite happened. And I'll get into why that's significant when we get into some of these court rulings that come out of the BC Supreme Court. So anyway, so we prepare. We end up filing a petition into the BC Supreme Court, but Barbara Finley decides she's going to sneak in ahead of us, doesn't tell anybody, pretends that she's not, and puts something in under the family law. And she goes in as counsel for my daughter, which is, you can't do that, because in my written agreement again with my ex-wife, any decisions on a child wanting a lawyer to sue their own parents, well, the parents have to come to an agreement on who that lawyer is, or the court appoints one. Mm-hmm. Well, Barbara Finley just self-appointed at that point in time, and so we actually kind of ignored her at the beginning for a while. But there she was, right in the middle of it. So we end up in court, because now that she's filed first, we have to end up going in on her family application. And so we're in front of a Justice Bowden. And so he hears all the arguments, and of course, I don't know what to think is going to happen next, but anyways, we do get a ruling, and this is one of the craziest things that documents I've ever read, is that I had to refer to my daughter with only her chosen pronouns. If I didn't, it was considered now family violence, which is criminal, and I couldn't try and dissuade her in any way from what she was doing in terms of trying to transition. I could only, be a cheerleader for her. And it was absolutely an insane ruling. And so they fully sided with the Infants Act and said, yeah, no, it was a parent have absolutely no say in this, and Bowden confirmed that I didn't have access to medical records again either. It was quite...
The moment they just pushed you out entirely.
It was the moment I got pushed out entirely, pretty much. And so that evening, I did an interview with the Federalist in which I spoke out, and I said that I would not be referring to my daughter with male pronouns because she is a girl. She always will be. That you cannot change her DNA. And I know I made comments like, this is just, they're experimenting on her like she's a guinea pig. And so I get hauled back into court because I'm now being accused of the family violence in the Bowden ruling. And so I get brought in front of Mazzari, Justice Francesco Mazzari. And she essentially weaponizes the Bowden ruling. And what comes out of that is that, yes, I was guilty of family violence. and now I'm only entitled to my thoughts. Anything, I can only talk to my lawyers about what's going on. I can't talk to anybody else, even have a cup of coffee with somebody and talk about these issues. And the only thing, that I have left is my thoughts, because they can't police my thoughts. But other than that, I've got to be a cheerleader as I watch, my child's body, healthy body, being destroyed. All I can do is cheerlead from the sideline. I mean, it's maddening what they did. And then further to that, they get a protection order in which they say if I, commit family violence, as they put it again, and were to say, she is a he's a she, I could be thrown in jail by the RCMP or any police with jurisdiction without even a warrant. Like, that's the serious nature of the crime apparently I'm committing by, not not wanting to abide by this delusion, which it is. It's a complete delusion that you can change from one sex to the other. Like,
They even admitted in their own documents
that it's a delusion.
that it's impossible.
It's impossible, yeah. So anyway, so I'm under this protection order now, and so I don't speak for quite a long time. Obviously people are learning about the case and things like that, but I'm not speaking on it. In fact, I didn't have to. I mean, these rulings were writing their own stories. People were just aghast, I think, at what was coming out of the BC Supreme Court. So we appeal it. We appeal it to the highest court in BC, which is the BC Court of Appeal. And our hearing is set for the beginning of September of 2019. And it's a 3-day hearing in front of a panel of 3 judges. And in fact, the Chief Justice of the BC Court of Appeal sat in on the case. I guess he felt it was that important. And so we wait until January to finally get that ruling. It comes out January 10. And essentially what it did is it took away some of the bite that was coming out of the Supreme Court rulings. Like, they said, yes, this is not family violence anymore. I do have the right to dissuade my child, but I still have to use the preferred pronouns. So even though I'm trying to dissuade her, I guess I can show her some literature, say, there's another course of action. This isn't the best way forward. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's a step in the right direction. I mean, the one thing that I'm proud of that came out of the BC Court of Appeal ruling is the fact that I'm allowed to dissuade her. Mm-hmm. And what the BC Court of Appeal made very clear is that under the Infants Act, it's not what is in the child's best interest. And they even said the court can't decide what's in the child's best interest either. Only the doctor can decide what's in the child's best interest. So this now leaves the doctors vulnerable, because all these doctors are still, they think they're doing this great work, but they're all hiding behind the kids. They're all saying, well, we're just affirming because the child wanted it. Well, no, if you're down the road in a malpractice suit and this child says, I was a child, why did you think this was in my best interest? They have to explain why they as doctors thought this was in their best interest. They can't just simply say, well, I was affirming the child. That's a cop-out now. So it kind of took away all this affirming ideology nonsense that's been out there, where everyone's been saying, well, you have to affirm the child, affirm. Well, no, this is now doctor's decision alone. Still not mine as a parent. I'm out of the loop, but at least the onus is now firmly on the shoulders of these doctors, and they're going to have to answer for this down the road. I swear there's going to be lawsuits coming up down the road when this massive amount of kids that are part of this social contagion right now all realize that their lives have been ruined. Their healthy body's gone, mm-hmm. and they can never get it back, right? Completely preventable stuff. What's significant is that the whole idea behind all this is that as a parent, I wasn't supposed to know what's going on. I had to find out so many things in the courts through affidavits, like the counselors, they're all part of it. Dr. Wong, he's attached to the school too. There's so many things, and it's hard to explain to other parents, because this is where I want parents to wake up. Mm-hmm. Because I honestly, I didn't know either, and I know many parents out there are finally, because I'm speaking, realizing what is going on in the school system, mm-hmm. because they're not supposed to know either. That's why they want to muzzle this thing, right? If it comes out into the light of day, it's hard to hide. I mean, mm-hmm. if parents start realizing what's going on, I mean, this could be the end of this whole experiment for them, and it's obviously a pretty important experiment they're doing, because they sure want to muzzle everybody on it and make sure nobody knows.
Why do you think they're being so serious about the gag order? Is it just a PR issue? Do they not want Canadians to be aware of the fact that they're doing this to parents Why do you think they want to silence you so much?
Well, because I think if other parents knew, that would put an end to the social contagion. That would put an end to the experiment. And that goes back to that very first story in the National Post, because in January, that made front page, because that story showed the fact that the public was no longer just prepared to go along with this stuff anymore. You know, a line had been crossed. And they were used to saying, putting little Johnny on a pedestal, and everybody going, that mean, awful parent not letting his child, go from a boy to a girl, and that's what the child really wants. And so that tremendous backlash is what started their whole idea, their whole movement to gag me, because they realized that it was no good for them anymore to have this thing public, as it had been before in the past. The parents need to know what's going on, because this wasn't a process that just kind of started one day and was done the next. This was not an overnight thing. This was a slow grooming of my daughter over many, many years under my nose, without me knowing what was going on. Starting back in elementary school. I mean, it's been, I can't even count how many years now, 4 or 5 years of stuff to get to that point where these kids are so brainwashed that they're willing to take that next step, and in fact, they're not even willing. They're like excited to take that next step and start taking these cross-sex hormones, right? They don't understand they're destroying their own perfectly healthy body. You know, I've made this analogy before. It's almost like these kids, they can just say, okay, well, if you're not happy in the body that you're in, and because you're depressed, well, we'll just recreate you. Why don't you just pick what you want to be? And I've said it's kind of like an avatar, right? In a video game where you can kind of pick how you want to look, your hair color, and they say, yeah, but we can do this in real. You don't have to be that sad girl anymore. We can just transform you into this boy, and then it's a whole new identity. It's like starting over. All that baggage that you felt as a girl, gone.
It's like putting themselves in the place of God, saying, His design for you was flawed. We can do better.
That's pretty much what they're saying.
Yeah.
And these kids are just running at it, right? I mean, they've done such a good job in the schools, because there is no parents being able to step in and understand what's going on in those moments. And so the school has free reign over your children, over their development, because they're not telling parents what's going on. So as a parent, you don't even know whether to intercede or not. You don't know whether to give direction to your child, because you have no idea what direction is being given by the schools to your children at this point. And I want to make one thing a little bit clear, because I know a lot of people say, well, it's the teachers in the schools. And yes, there are activist teachers in the schools, but it's not like every teacher is on board with this stuff. Trust me, that is not the case. There are a lot of good teachers. And in fact, where it's really being driven is by the SOGI program, which is actually counselors coming into the schools and promoting the SOGI program in the classroom.
And pushing certain doctors, apparently.
And pushing certain doctors. I mean, it's essentially like a pipeline through the counselors, through guys like Dr. Wallace Wong, to Dr. Brendan Hirsch at the endocrinologist unit in BC Children's Hospital. And I was talking to somebody the other day. He says that they're actually going into schools preschool and pre-selecting the kids that they think they're going to be able to pull off in this direction. At that early age, they are taking names and saying, that little 5-year-old Johnny, he's going to be a candidate. We can just tell by the way he behaves.
Wow.
And we're going to target him throughout his school career.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how sick it's gotten.
So there may be some parents out here, watching this going, holy, this is crazy. How do I know if this is going on with my kid? Or what sort of advice might you have for parents who are maybe unaware that this could potentially be happening to their own kid?
Well, just look for the first sign. There's certain telltale signs a little bit. Like if your kid suddenly starts saying, well, can a girl be a boy? That should be a wake-up call. That stuff's being fed into their minds for sure. And at that point, as a parent, you've got to set the record straight and counter that, I think. If all of a sudden, for some reason, you discover that the school counselor is suddenly involved with your child, and they may not tell you, the school counselors, but let's say you do find out, make it stop. Like get your kid independent counselor that you trust. Like never trust the school counselors anymore, because they're funneling every issue a child has down this transgender road and saying that's the solution for every problem that's out there now. It'll fix everything, right? Going back to my avatar analogy, right? They're just saying anything that's wrong with you is this particular person, we're just going to wipe the slate clean and you're now the other sex and you're brand new. So in a sense, what they're selling is, we can solve every problem by doing this because we're just eliminating that person with a whole new identity. Right? And so looking ahead, like, what am I going to do for my daughter? Because the government's not going to be there when she changes her mind. In fact, anyone that changes their mind and detransitions, I mean, they eat their own. It's like they're traitors, and they pretty much get tossed to the curb. So I'm trying to figure out how do I prepare, for this down the road, because I think she is going to detransition. A lot of them do. I mean, they grow up and realize what a mistake. And so I've set up something with Angeline Ireland and with Jen Smith called the CANIS Foundation, which is CAENIS Foundation. And what this foundation is, it serves two purposes. The one purpose is it's going to serve to educate parents who are going through what I'm going through, because I've been there. I've been through it, and I can kind of explain things from a perspective that a lot of parents don't really know because they're not supposed to know. And so we want to be a resource to be able to educate, like anyone that needs the education. And Jen Smith is great on educating, and of course with Angeline Ireland. So that's one side of it that we're going to be doing. Like how do I get legal advice? Like, what as a parent, and it's important because if you Google support groups for this thing, you're going to find just a overwhelming amount that are there to help parents accept the transition of their child. And it's crazy stuff, because what they do is they tell these parents, they get them into these support groups, and they tell them that you're doing the right thing and that you just have to grieve the loss of your child as if the child had passed away, and then accept this new child. And the problem is they're good at what they do, because these parents do believe, because of the coaching that they get themselves, that they're doing the right thing for their child. But I think if there was, more places like what the CANIS Foundation will be, these parents can look online and go, oh, I'm actually not alone to think this is ludicrous, right? That this is wrong. I don't have to accept this. I've never grieved the loss of my daughter. I think my ex has, but I haven't, because I don't accept that my daughter is gone. In fact, that's impossible. And so I think it's important that there's alternative options. I know it's unpopular, and I know people want to say we're probably going to be a hate group for all the. I mean, it's just it's incredible how common sense and the mass majority of people are apparently the bad people in this country. But the second purpose of the CANIS Foundation is, and this is where it becomes personal with my own child, is looking ahead to all these kids that are going to be detransitioning, and knowing that what we've done in the BC Court of Appeal is set up all these malpractice lawsuits by putting the best interest of the child decision squarely on the shoulders of the doctor. And so, because this is such a massive social contagion, I think there's going to be numbers like we've never seen wanting to come together and just go after class action lawsuits, you name it. And we want to be set up so that we can help these kids out, right? And so that's where it's personal for me with my own daughter going forward, in terms of having something in place, because I thought, if my daughter is going to be going through this, what would I want out there? And I thought, well, there's nothing like that out there. I'll put it out there. So that's where we're going with that. Yeah,
that's awesome. That something potentially really big and positive can come out of something so terrible that might be able to help other people going through the same thing.
Yeah. I hope, just like I said, the hospitals won't be there for my daughter, but as a community and as a resource group, and as we all need to come together down the road for these kids, because they're going to need us like in an incredible way. Yeah.
I think moving forward, we're going to have to set up something to protect families that are going through this. We're also going to have to kind of go after the Wallace Wongs, if you will, of the world, and hold them accountable. What would you say to somebody like him if you had the opportunity to really, say, look, man, this is what you're doing to my family? What would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, what can you say to somebody like that? In some ways, it's like, a mother going into a prison and confronting the person that killed their child. Like, can you offer? I mean, and you hear these great stories where they say, "Well, I forgive you for what you've done," but it's not like this guy's changing, so you can't forgive him for what he's doing because he's continuing to do it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if Dr. Wallace Wong were to suddenly come out tomorrow and say, "You know what? Everything that I've done, I realize it was a complete mistake. I'm ruining children's lives." I would have respect for that at this point. Mm-hmm. But at this point, there's zero respect for him because he's not going to change his ways, or he hasn't. He's continuing to do this. I mean, I would tell him, look what you're doing. You're taking perfectly healthy bodies and absolutely destroying lives. Mm-hmm. Just so you can get a paycheck. Is a child's life not important to you? Mm-hmm. So quit running around and pretending you're helping children when you're actually mutilating and destroying them. I've called this, it's state-sponsored child abuse, and that's exactly what it is. And they're getting away with it in the open. Mm-hmm. Like, unbelievable. This isn't an issue that's just for one particular group of people to step in and say enough is enough. This is a mainstream issue. This is not a left versus a right issue. This is mainstream people. This is about families, about parents. It doesn't matter what religion you are. I often say, boy, I hope the LGB people get involved because I don't think they like what's going on with the kids. Nobody here is saying when you're, of the age of majority or you're an adult that anyone's going to tell you what to do in terms of these decisions. I mean, you are an adult. If you want to wreck your own body or you think you want to do that, that's, you're at least making a thought out choice when your brain is formulated properly, right? Mm-hmm. Not as a child brain, which isn't fully developed. And so I would just encourage everybody. I mean, this is there shouldn't be sides on this in the sense of everybody coming together to help save kids. I mean, when you start messing with kids, that's a line crossed, I think, and everybody should be upset about that. Mm-hmm. Not just me as a father or a certain group of people out there that this should be a universal, like, pushback.
Yeah. Going after the kids is just about the worst thing that they could possibly do, and this is coming at the hands of the government.